So without further ado, before we introduce our presenter tonight, we are thrilled to welcome New York Times bestselling author who lives right here in Wheaton. So tonight's program is set up as an interview. So before we introduce our interviewee, I'd like to introduce our interviewer, Karen Schreck. Karen is our Community Engagement Associate here at the library, where she facilitates our very large fiction book discussion group, which is so large, there are 3 different times each month that the group meets, but we are always welcoming new members. So if you're interested, check out the times on our calendar. She is also an author of several books for adults, young adults, and children, as well as short stories and articles for various literary journals and magazines. So I am going to hand it over to her to introduce our speaker. There you go.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to introduce Shelby now. Shelby was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, and now she lives in Wheaton with her family. Remarkably Bright Creatures, her debut novel, released just this past spring, and it was both a New York Times bestseller, and I think an instant New York Times bestseller, like it hit really fast, and a Read with Jenna Book Club pick on the Today Show. Shelby's book garnered stellar reviews, including this from Jamie Ford, author of The Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, and The Many Daughters of Afong Moy. Quote, Shelby Van Pelt has created a perfect story with imperfect characters that is so heartwarming, so mysterious, and so completely absorbing, you won't be able to put it down, because when you're not reading this book, you'll be hugging it. I would hug the book right now. And I can attest to that, all of that. And also, it's such a wonderful combination of heartwarming and mysterious. That's really unique, and I love that about the book. So I know, Shelby, you have traveled a lot, moved around some, yes, and you've had a bunch of home libraries, but now Wheaton Public Library is your home library, and we're so happy you're here. And I'm just wondering if you've had time with everything that's been going on and COVID and things like that to engage with the library in the last amount of time that you've lived here.
Yeah, so I call us basement dwellers in our family because I have 2 young kids, and so usually we come in the door and head straight down here over to the kids section, but we're here all the time. I actually, when I was writing the book, when I was drafting some of the early parts of it, and when I was trying to get back into writing after kind of a stretch of being away, was really when we had first moved here in about 2018. And I used to come sit up on the 2nd floor. There are some really, really nice tables up there that have a view of Adams Park. And you can get your coffee and sit up there, and there's other people writing. And I spent a lot of time up there in those couple years. COVID kind of killed it, and I haven't gotten back in the habit yet, but I really need to, because they keep telling me I need to write another book, so.
Yeah. Well, I want to hear more about that, but it's writing is so isolating. I would imagine like being in a place with quiet companions is like a really great balance for getting the work done.
And for me, libraries are the perfect kind of balance of that. You know, coffee shops are great, but it's a little bit too much sometimes. You know, the noise and the just kind of hustle and bustle. In the library, it's perfect. It's quiet, but it's not too quiet. You know, there's other people around, and there's kind of some very low level of din. But it's easy to focus for me in that kind of environment.
That's awesome. So I've asked if Shelby would mind reading a little bit from the book, and she's agreed to do that, and
sure. I'm
looking forward to hearing it. And if you don't mind actually just describing it for those who haven't, just distilling maybe the essence of the plot.
So yeah, Remarkably Bright, and then I tripped my tongue on my own title. Remarkably Bright Creatures. It's a book about an octopus, but like it's not really a book about an octopus. It's, you know, he is one of the narrators of the book, and he kind of pops in occasionally to give his takes on things. But really, it's a book about humans and loneliness, friendship, connection. A lot of the characters are in kind of a later stage of their life, and what they need to do is realize that it's not too late to kind of make a change or go down a different path or shake things up. And for me, I think that's the big theme of the book, is sort of getting unstuck.
Yeah.
So yeah, I will read. There's one section I always like to read. Some of you may have heard it before if you've been to other events, but it's from Marcellus's perspective. So you're listening to an octopus talking here. I don't know if any of you all are audiobook readers. If you are, you know that Michael Urie did the narration for this, and he did it very, very well. So I always feel a little bit like, oh, I'm never going to be as good as Michael Urie at reading Marcellus, but I will try. Okay, day 1309 of my captivity. You humans love cookies. I assume you know which food I mean? Circular, about the size of a common clamshell. Some are flecked with dark bits, others are painted or dusted with powder. Cookies can be soft and quiet, moving soundlessly on their journey through human jaws. Cookies can be loud and messy, bits breaking off at the bite, crumbs tumbling down a chin, adding to the flotsam on the floor that the elderly female called Tova must sweep. I have observed many cookies during my captivity here. They are sold in the packaged food machine near the front entrance. Imagine my confusion then at the remark made by Dr. Santiago earlier this evening. What can I say, Terry? Dr. Santiago raised her shoulders and held her hands up. I've seen a lot of octopuses, but you've got a smart cookie here. They were discussing the so-called puzzle, a hinged box made of clear plastic with a latch on the lid. There was a crab inside. Terry lowered it into my tank. He and Dr. Santiago leaned down to peer through the glass. Without delay, I seized the box, opened the latch, lifted the lid, and ate the crab. It was a red rock crab, one that was molting, soft and juicy. I consumed it in a single bite. This did not please Terry and Dr. Santiago. They argued. I gathered they had anticipated my dismantling of the box to take longer. I am a smart cookie. Well, of course I am intelligent. All octopuses are. I remember each and every human face that pauses to gaze at my tank. Patterns come readily to me. I know how the sunrise will play on the upper wall at dawn, shifting each day as the season progresses. When I choose to hear, I hear everything. I can tell when the tide is turning to ebb outside the prison walls based on the tone of the water crashing against the rocks. When I choose to see, my vision is precise. I can tell which particular human has touched the glass of my tank by the fingerprints left behind. Learning to read their letters and words was easy. I can use tools. I can solve puzzles. None of the other prisoners have such skills. My neurons number 500 million, and they are distributed among my 8 arms. On occasion, I have wondered whether I might have more intelligence in a single tentacle than a human does in its entire skull. Smart cookie. I am smart, but I am not a snack object dispensed from a packaged food machine. What a preposterous thing to say. So
Great.
He's a bit of a grump.
He's a bit of a grump, but he's also such a complicated entity. Like, I love the way his voice works. He's kind of making an argument. There's so much logic, and your prose, well, he's speaking it, but it's your prose with the attention to detail that is just incredible. And I guess what I'm wondering is, did that voice come to you like that, or did Marcellus's voice evolve as you came to understand him more deeply?
I would say it pretty much came to me like that. It's one of those things you don't really know how or why, but I guess I'll tell a little bit of his origin story. It actually started out as a writing exercise in a class I was taking. And it was just one of these things where it was meant to be kind of a, jog your writing muscle type of thing. Just, write down on a notebook paper for 15 minutes and, free write basically with this prompt. And yeah, I just thought of, we were supposed to write from a unique point of view. And so I thought of this octopus. Octopus in captivity would be really kind of like angry and would be looking down on the humans. But at the same time, like curious about them, and kind of have that underlying like boredom / curiosity, matched with the power of observation. And yeah, I sometimes say I think there might have been like a grumpy old man in a past life inside me, because that voice just kind of flowed out when I started writing it. And yeah, I refined it a little bit over time, but it pretty much came out like that.
Super interesting. I mean, there are so many voices you could have chosen, but that's the one that, because the world is the octopus's oyster, right? As a writer, you could have chosen anything, but that seems perfect to me. And I love the idea of flipping. You know, we think of animals looking at animals, right? But the fact of us being scrutinized by them is just a wonderful way of looking at the world. I'm also curious how you chose Marcellus's name.
Well, for a while he didn't have a name, and then I decided that I was going to name him Marcus Aurelius, after the philosopher, the famous Stoic philosopher. I was a philosophy major in college, and I remember reading his Meditations book. I've read it many times, and you know, for me, Marcellus, he does think about death every day in that kind of classic Stoic way, and he's looking death head on, counting down the days as he approaches the end of his life. So I thought that would be a great name. And all of my friends and writing partners were like, no, you can't do that. Like, it's just, you don't want to make it seem heavier than it is. You don't want people to think it's a philosophy's book. It's not Sophie's Choice, it's a fiction book, whatever, it's fun. So I just literally made like a portmanteau of Marcus and Aurelius, kind of mashed them up. And I really liked the way it had the kind of S at the end, and the double L's just seemed very octopus-like. So
Circuitous, like many-armed. Yeah, and if I remember about the Stoics, they are all about ethics too, and a virtuous life. And there's a lot in the book, I believe, about making choices out of kindness, and compassion, which I love. I think that the other characters, I mean, Marcellus is fantastic, but the other characters are brilliantly drawn as well. There's Tova, who is 70 years old and who has definitely had challenges in her life, but is I don't know if you thought of her as Stoic, but
yes.
Yeah. And then there is Cameron, who's 30, and who is this wonderful, he's a man, but he behaves very much like a boy.
Yeah.
Along the way. Maybe teenager.
Man-child.
Man-child.
Yes.
Right.
Technical term.
Yeah. I mean, that was really interesting. I have kids who are teenagers, and watching them kind of make their choices, it's really interesting. And then there's Ethan, who's elderly, Scottish, interestingly, kind of like the town gossip, keeps everybody connected in this smallish town that thinks Seoul is.
Yes.
So they're all so distinct, and they're all so different than you. Or maybe there are connections that I don't presume to know. And I guess I'm wondering if you intended to spend time with people who were different than you, or if they're not, what the connections would be.
I think, when writing, my impulse was not to write a, 30 or 40 something year old woman, because, that's me. And I guess somewhere back in the back of my brain, I kept having this thought of, well, I want it to be clear that this is not, autofiction, or, that I'm not writing myself into this character too much. But I did write myself into a lot of those characters, sometimes almost unintentionally. I think I learned a lot about myself through the writing of those characters. Tova in particular, she has a lot in common with my grandmother, who passed away several years ago. I'd say Tova was kind of inspired by her. I I stole the nitwits from my grandmother's life. That was the real thing that I, just went ahead and borrowed. I don't think any of them are still with us, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, so they don't need to know that I stole their group name. But, so Tova is, she keeps everyone at arm's length. She has this group of friends, her nitwits, that she gets together with regularly, longtime friends, and, they want to help her. They want to support her. But she kind of keeps everyone at a distance. She just is afraid of being a burden. She's afraid to put herself out there. She's afraid of vulnerability. And, you mentioned that I've lived in a lot of cities. I've moved around a lot. And I feel like when I was writing the book and I realized, I was thinking this about Tova, this is the way she is. And I was like, God, I'm kind of that way too. You move into a new city and it's like, it's hard to make friends. And I kind of am like wary of everyone. And, I don't always kind of let people in like I should. And it was interesting to learn that about myself, or to realize that about myself, and, realize like, hey, I could do better about this in my life. I think for Cameron, the 30-year-old guy who's kind of a, failure to launch, I originally wrote him as a teenager, so it's funny that you mentioned seeing some of your teenagers in him. Yeah. But when I first wrote the character, he I think was 15, and obviously that created this whole logistical problem with like generations and years. So early on, I kind of thought, I'm going to have to age him up in order to make this like work with ages and birth and stuff. But I also felt like I needed to age him up because I needed it to be inappropriate for him to be acting that way. I mean, you see teenagers having this, this kind of problems with self-confidence, and they can't, adulting is hard, and
very hard.
And you expect that from a teenager, but by the time you're 30, it's like, come on, man, it's time to get it together. And so aging him up really solved that problem for me. Mm-hmm. But I think I did take a lot of his little traits and quirks and borrowed some stuff from when I was, like in my early 20s, and just kind of being not my best self in many ways. But yeah, and it was interesting to reflect back on that too, and think, wow, I wasn't as bad as he was, but I did probably have some growing up to do.
Yeah. I loved his character because of the way he so clearly evolved. I mean, this is a person, I don't want to give too much of the book away, of course, for those of you who haven't read it, but there's so many challenges that have been in his life that helps me understand why he functions like he does or doesn't function like he does. And he is definitely on a quest in this book, and it's a mysterious quest, and he really changes on that journey, and I loved seeing that evolve. How about Ethan? Do you have a 70-year-old Scotsman living inside you, 60-something?
I wish.
I know.
He's one of my favorite characters. No, Ethan is almost just pure fun from a writing perspective. He's the lovable, nosy, gossipy guy. I wanted someone to be the anti-Tova a little bit. Tova is very, holds her personal self very close. Gossiping is not her thing. She tries to stay out of everyone's business and definitely wants everyone out of her business. And so I thought, okay, well, I need to have a town gossip who will kind of push her a little bit and foil her in that way. And I just thought, who better in a small town to be all up in everyone's business than the guy who's at the grocery store, and everyone's got to buy eggs and milk, right? Like, he just would be well positioned to see everyone coming through there. And I don't know how he ended up being like this Scottish guy. It's just, again, like the voice that kind of popped into my head. I don't know, maybe it was an attempt subconsciously to just infuse some more humor in it, or some more warmth maybe, because you have a town gossip that can have a negative connotation too, right? And I definitely wanted readers to, be kind of on his side and just see him as this kind of lovable guy.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that about the negative connotation, because I think with both of those characters, Tova and Ethan, possibly Cameron, definitely the Octopus, we might have some preconceptions about what they'll be like. I mean, I don't think I've ever even imagined an octopus's interiority. So, but here's a woman who's 70, who is living on her own and has suffered loss. And here's a town gossip who is a man, and is kind of the fulcrum for a lot of the action, working as he does in the center of the community. I'm wondering if you were consciously kind of unpacking stereotypes or preconceived notions with those characters. I mean, it sounds like you were with Ethan on a certain level, but with Tova.
Yeah, and I think when you have leading roles for women in books and in movies, a lot of times they are these kind of, they're either larger than life, the kind of, bombastic, big character, or they are, I don't want to say like kind of witchy or.
Are you talking about older women in particular?
In
or just
particular,
women?
yes.
That's interesting.
I mean, I feel like they fall into categories, and Tova is she's just a quiet, stoic lady. You don't see quieter heroines as much, and I definitely liked being able to create that kind of role for a leading lady.
Right, and I don't think there's giving too much away. I mean, your passage suggested Marcellus was very aware of her presence, but she's chosen not out of necessarily need in terms of finances, but just maybe in terms of her own sense of identity, self-sufficiency, to work as a janitor in the night, cleaning an aquarium. And she's really making really tactical choices throughout the book.
Yeah.
And I don't think there are as many books that I know of, and certainly Hollywood has really cut us short in this way as well, with this really complicated, still changing, still with the potential to evolve, older woman. I really loved that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, she, I borrowed from my grandmother and other family members too, to a certain extent, of just this, kind of keeping busy, for always having something to do, like kind of not being able to keep still. And, I liked how that fit with having so much of the book set in an aquarium. If you've ever been to an aquarium, particularly the bigger ones where they have the big, huge tanks that have lots of different things in there. If you sit there long enough, you'll see the same shark or ray or turtle or whatever, and they just do like a loop. And they do the same like little path every time. And, and that's what Tova is kind of doing in her life. And, that's what I watch, at least from my perspective as a much younger person, my grandmother doing in her life. She was just very, Tuesdays were for washing the sheets and Wednesdays were for cleaning the baseboards. And it didn't matter if they needed to be cleaned or not. It was something to do. And so she would do it.
Right.
And not that that's a bad thing, but I guess I always just wondered, like, well, what if something had come along to just like shake her up and really shake her out of those habits and, force some change.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think those chores are also a way, I don't know about your grandmother, but certainly in this book, to avoid some pain too.
Absolutely.
Busyness, doesn't lead, what is the saying, like busy hands and something about idle minds?
Yeah.
The idle mind can get dangerous sometimes. Yeah. So speaking of the aquarium, which is such a wonderful setting, and I've never been to that small of an aquarium, but I felt like I could smell it throughout the book. So I asked before we got started about the town name, and it's Sowell Bay. I thought it might be Sowell Bay because that's kind of how it's spelled. It is how it's spelled. I'm curious, did you know a place like that? Is that a dream town for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, which is a much bigger city than somewhere like Sowell Bay. It's really a different type of setting, but I spent so much time in these little towns that were kind of clustered around the Seattle and Tacoma area, particularly on the water. And I liked the idea that it was close enough to Seattle that it wasn't totally, the sticks, but it was far enough that it wasn't a suburb. It was its own little ecosystem. And I love reading books about small towns. It's always a setting that I'm drawn to as a reader. And I think small town settings just always lend themselves to, kind of some of the gossip and the plot things that can happen when you have people that are tight-knit in that way, especially people that have been in each other's lives for a long time. And I think it's also reflective a little bit of change, like Solo Bay is changing in the book. And actually in a previous draft, I had that being a lot more of a theme than it ended up being. But it is still a little bit of a backbone to all of this, that, they're building new condos and they're new housing developments and people are moving in from far away. And that is very much, I think, the reality for a lot of the Pacific Northwest, particularly Seattle and its surrounding areas. Housing prices are insane there. There's a lot of development, a lot of influx of people from other places. Although that might be changing now. I don't know. I think it is, maybe has hit a peak where it got so expensive that it's gonna come down the other way a little bit. But yeah, and that's hard too when you're someone that's been in one of those towns and then it starts to change before your eyes. That's just another thing that another form of change that you have to cope with.
Right. And there's this mix of new residents, right, coming in, but then there's Tova, whose family has lived there for generations. So it is really shifting in that way. I love the small town environment, and I don't think, with the sound right there, you make such incredible use of the natural landscape in really driving the plot. And when I guess what I'm thinking as I say these things is everything seems really intentional, and you thought about kind of inverting in your work and inverting stereotypes. Did you do a lot of pre-planning with the book, like thinking I need a foil to Toba, so I'm going to create Ethan?
I did that sort of planning definitely on a character level, much more so than on a plot level. Plotting for me is by far the hardest part of writing. So if you ask me to sit down and outline a story, I'm blank. I'm like, I don't know what happens. Like, I have to write it to figure it out. So I definitely did a lot of, intentionally creating this cast of characters that, would work well with each other. Having tension between characters is so important in the book. So I tried to create them in such a way that they would naturally find that tension without it having to be forced. But as far as the plot goes, I really just felt my way through the dark. And I wouldn't recommend that, actually. It's not the most efficient way to write a story, but it seems to be how my brain works, so.
Yeah, they say like plotters and pantsers, by the seat of your pants.
Yes.
Is how you kind of make your way.
I am a pantser.
Yeah.
Yes.
So did you go back in and revision then? Did you have a number of revisions on the book? There's
a lot that ended up on the cutting room floor, because when you don't know what's going to happen, you're going to make wrong turns. Yeah. I had a wonderful critique partner who I would get on the phone with every week. She was kind of doing the same thing. We both had these books that we had been working on for years and years. And I spent 5 years writing the first 2 or 3 chapters over and over again. And I would get to, okay, I'm going to move the story forward. And then, I'm just going to go back and revise chapter 1 again. And just, polishing it, trying to make it perfect. It's an avoidance tactic, right? That's what I was doing. I didn't really know it. But we both kind of needed to force ourselves out of our comfort zone and move on. So we created this weekly phone call where we would trade our material from the week and then go through kind of the plot stuff and really kind of like a beta read, but in real time as it was going. And so I had a lot of feedback when I would start to go down a path. We would talk about it and be like, okay, well, no, I can't have this happen. I need to pull back a little bit and go down this path instead in order to I kind of knew where I wanted to go. I had an idea of the ending, but point A to point B was a lot of, the path was very squiggly.
Yeah. That perfectionist mode, it's like people can be their own worst critics,
Yes.
right? And put on the brakes for themselves. What was the hardest part of the process then the middle of the book for you?
Definitely the middle. And I think that's pretty common. I hear a lot that they call it the mushy middle.
Right.
Where you can get good momentum. I'm talking about as a writer. You get good momentum at the beginning. You get everything set up. You know where you want to go, but then it just kind of sags in the middle, and you have to really. It's like riding through quicksand or something. You really have to kind of pull yourself through it, and then you get to this point, and I can remember where this point is in the book for me, where it's like I went from running, trying to trudge through quicksand to all of a sudden I'm like jogging on hard ground again. Wow. And, you can kind of feel it accelerates toward the end, when things are kind of starting to fall into place. But the middles are tough. Wow. And, I experienced that as a reader too. Sometimes there's a book and it can be, a brilliant book, but you just get to this part in the middle and you can tell like, this is just sagging a little bit,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you always want to write when you were a child? How did you come to writing?
I wrote a lot when I was a child. I read a lot when I was a child. I was an only child, and so books were like my friends. I had real friends too, but I spent a lot of time at my library, my local library where I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, checking out every Babysitter's Club book that they had and reading them under the covers at night. I always loved writing, but I never thought of myself as being particularly creative. So I did a lot of, I worked on my high school newspaper and yearbook and did that kind of writing. And, in college, I always loved writing papers more than other types of homework, I guess. And I never, I guess, envisioned myself writing a novel because I never really had the spark of an idea until, I got to that writing class and it was like, I could write something about an octopus. Like this actually seems like a pretty good idea and people seem to like it. So, from that point is when I kind of started considering it. But it's funny because, I go to some of these writing festivals and stuff and people are like, oh, you're a writer, like you're an artist. And I'm like, it's really hard for me to think of myself as an artist, to think that like I can be creative and make things. Like it's just a different identity than I ever really envisioned myself embracing.
Have you reconciled yourself to it?
I'm getting there.
Yeah, I hope so.
Although now I'm, in the process of trying to get another book kind of off the ground and, I'm going through all of the same stuff as I did with the first one. Like, I don't, I have like this idea, but like, I'm just writing the first chapter over and over again. And is it going to be any good? And all of that nonsense we tell ourselves.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what might be next?
Yeah, there's not much to talk about yet.
You've been busy. You have been very busy.
But when you start seeing me up on the second floor with my earbuds in, then you'll know that maybe there's something happening. No, I've got several scenes. I don't totally know where it's going to go yet. It's not going to be like a sequel or a prequel or anything. I've thought about that, and I still do think about it sometimes. But I don't know. It just kind of feels like the book ended where it should have, and I can't imagine writing about another octopus. Like, I can't imagine replacing Marcellus.
You're loyal.
So I'm loyal to him.
Yeah.
And so this new book definitely has some of that kind of weirdness. Like there's some weird things about it that might make people go like, what? But it's not going to be a sequel.
So none of the lesser characters will make appearances, because I love some of the characters that were hardly, they were there for a reason, but then.
I don't know. I'm open to that. I've thought a lot about that because I think that's really fun when books take place in the same world but are otherwise not necessarily related. It's always fun to see those little Easter eggs. So maybe some Easter eggs.
I hope so. So I'm assuming you took that class then in more recent years with the writing class where you first dug into Marcellus?
Yeah, I've taken a couple. That class in particular, I was living in Atlanta, and it was at Emory University, part of their continuing education program. And I was new in town and was like, well, maybe I could meet some people in this writing class. So, I signed up for it and it ended up changing my life. So, I guess always sign up for the class. You never know. But I've taken a similar one here. There's one at College of DuPage. There's a couple actually. There's like, I think there's a memoir one and a fiction one. And I think they're great. And I know you guys have a writing workshop here as well. Those are really wonderful resources. Like I feel like you don't have to have an MFA to learn how to write. And there's so many of these continuing education and library and kind of community-based classes are often like either very affordable or free. They're open to anyone. There's no applying. You get people from all different levels, all different stages of life, walks of life, and I think they're fantastic.
So beyond the overwhelming surprise of, I'm assuming, was it an overwhelming, I'm making an assumption. Maybe you were expecting to land on the New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, no.
or have to, to me, appearing on national TV would be a big surprise that then I would have, there might be a little complicated feeling attached to that surprise. But for all of us, and maybe also for people who are working on their writing, what have you learned along the way in terms of it surprised you and then you worked with it and figured something out?
I think I think the amount of connection with readers is not something that I really expected, and has been just the coolest, like, pleasant surprise about the whole process. The amount of people that have told me, like, oh, I'm giving this book to my mom or my grandma. Like my publicist sent me a picture of her grandma reading the book. Her grandma is in her 90s and doesn't read much anymore. I think because it's just physically grown harder for her to do that. But I think she got her the large print version. And, it was like the first book that she had read and finished in a while. And like, just to be able to give someone that gift, it's just, I didn't set out to do that, but I'm so glad that has happened. And then I guess on a more day-to-day basis, I guess I'm surprised at, finding myself doing things like this. This is not the same skill set as writing a book. And all of the things that it takes to market a book and do the publicity is, I think, for a lot of new authors, a steep learning curve, and it has been for me too. But I'm happy to improve those skills. Like it's been great.
It's a lot to juggle, especially since I think your children are young and there's a lot going on.
It is a lot, but it's good. I will say in an ideal world, I might have put the national TV appearance like later in the game and not like one of the first things I did after launching the book, because it was stressful. It was good, but it was like a lot.
Yeah, I believe it. I can't imagine it, but I believe that it was a lot. So were you surprised by what it was like to write during the pandemic?
So I think I mentioned I had this kind of pact with a critique partner, and we had made that pact in the fall of 2019, which was also my peak, like, second floor table time, when I was, really getting down to the business of writing this book. And we had, I think, a good maybe like 3 or 4 month run before COVID hit. And I remember having this phone call with her. She lives in Atlanta, so we're always just, remote. And she has young kids too. And just deciding, like, are we really going to keep doing this? Like, it was the perfect excuse, especially once we realized schools weren't going to be closed for 2 weeks. They were going to just be closed. It would have been a good excuse to stop. And I think we both really considered just saying, well, let's just shelve this, get through the next few months, and then we'll pick back up again. But for some reason, we decided not to, which I'm really, really, really glad about that decision. Not only because it resulted in a finished book, but because I had something that was just mine at a time when I think a lot of caregivers and and parents just felt like I was trying to like hold the glue of the household together. And my husband's at home, he's on the conference call, like, in the bedroom, and the kids are trying to do Zoom. It was just like, and so I would put them to bed and then I would write, and like that was my time. And I would be very tired in the morning, but it was okay because we weren't going anywhere anyway. So, it worked somehow.
Like writing after your head is filled with a lot of language is, I think, a really interesting, that's a choice to find your way there. Do you still write at night?
I do. I'm more of a night owl than a morning person. And in an ideal world, I would do more writing while my kids are at school. And I need to get back in the habit of doing that, because that is like a chunk of time that I did not have during COVID that I am very grateful to have now. So, but yeah, I will sometimes, if I'm gonna like get in that kind of zone, it's usually gonna be like at night and extend into like way too late at night.
Interesting. When I was reading it, I kept thinking, I wish I had had this book with me during the pandemic, because it is a great companion, and those themes of loneliness and connection, isolation, even in a small town, were so profound for me in the wake of what we've all been through. So yeah, I really value that. I don't know. I know we want to. Here you are. We want to open it up to questions. And
so if anyone has any questions for Shelby, now is your chance. And before we get to questions, you mentioned our writers group. A quick plug, we do meet on the third Thursday of each month, and Karen is our facilitator for that. We do meet on Zoom, and all are welcome. So let me come over there. And if anyone has any questions at home, you can throw those into the Q&A or the chat. Who raised their hand?
Hi, thank you so much.
Yeah.
2 questions. The first being, what do you do for writer's block?
Oh gosh, I don't have a magic cure for that. I wish I did. I think this might not help writer's block for a specific project, but I really, really love like prompts and like prompted contests, which do a really good job of getting me out of like a writing funk. And sometimes that can then help you go back to an older project and be able to see it with fresh eyes, just like stepping away from it a little while and doing something completely different. My favorite one is called NYC Midnight. They have screenplay, short story, flash fiction, all these different kind of lengths and options. But they give you just the most bizarre prompts in the world. They give you a genre, and it's like an object and a character, and it'll be like, write a crime caper that takes place in a bakery and involves a mandolin. Like, it's like, so, and then you have to figure out how to make those things fit together, because they just on their face don't. But those are really great for those writing funks for me.
Awesome, thank you. And then also, where did you find your critique partner?
So I originally found them out of that first class that I took, was sort of where I made some of those connections, and then just kind of ended up connecting individually with some of those people, and we kind of formed our own little small group. But yeah, the writing classes are a great way to find critique partners, and actually the contests too. I've found critique partners that way. Sometimes they will have a Facebook group or a forum where you can go and post your story and then read other people's stories and give them feedback. And that's also a great way to meet other writers and critique partners. Yeah.
Another question I see right up front here.
I wanted to talk about the title.
Yeah, sure.
How did you come up with it? And I noticed it's not creature, it's creatures.
Yeah. This is a little bit embarrassing, but for the most of the duration of writing this, it did not actually have a real title. It was just this file called Marcellus that was on my computer. Actually, it was like, Marcellus v23.ab_final, whatever, all the different iterations of it. But I went through a title exercise that a writing friend that I met on a forum from a contest, had shared with me that she had done for one of her own projects. And it basically just asks you all these questions about your book and kind of forces you to go through and pull out favorite lines, themes. It asks you questions about your characters, kind of what they would do in certain situations or what some of their favorite things are. And it asks you about other books that you like or that you want would maybe be a comparable title for your book. And it kind of says like, well, can you kind of, copy the format of that title and, use your own stuff to put it in there. And I think that's where we get a lot of these like, the something life of someone, which are always great titles, but there's a lot of them that follow that same kind of format. But yeah, it came out of just, I had pulled a quote that had remarkably bright creatures in it, and I didn't even get through the whole exercise because I saw that and I was just like, oh, I think that's the title.
It's in the beginning, toward the beginning.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I also just really liked the kind of the double meaning of.
So you meant to make the reference to like not only Marcellus, but
yes,
maybe the Tova
and humans, that we are, yeah, we are creatures also. Sometimes we're bright, sometimes we're not, but yeah.
I have a question.
Remarkable.
How did you come up with the octopus? And tell me how you knew that octopus were smarter than anything else in the sea.
Well, there's a lot.
Or is that made up, maybe?
No,
I don't know.
I think that's true. They're by far the most intelligent invertebrates. I think cephalopods generally, which includes squid. Well, squids are not quite as intelligent as octopuses, as Marcellus would have you know. But cuttlefish are surprisingly intelligent, and they're another in that same. I'm going to bungle whether it's a class or a family, whatever, the same thing that octopuses are in, phylum, I don't know. I'm not a scientist, obviously. I just kind of play one when I'm an author. But yeah, no, so the idea for the octopus originally, I mentioned that I was in that writing class. That was how he came into being a character. But the particular octopus that I was thinking of when I was writing that was just from a video on the internet that had kind of gone viral around that time of an octopus at the Seattle Aquarium that was trying to escape. And this was like during broad daylight, people are there, and this thing is trying to go up and over the edge, and people are pushing the arms back in. And that octopus, I think they eventually did set it free, which was a nice ending to the internet fame of that octopus. But I just, it's like, this creature must be so frustrated. They are incredibly intelligent. There's a wonderful nonfiction book called Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery that I think I read it in about 2019 and definitely accelerated my interest in octopuses and kind of lit a fire under me to really get the story moving and get it finished. And she speaks a lot about she's a science journalist, and she speaks a lot about the intelligence of octopuses. And then there are so many glorious internet rabbit holes that you can go down about octopuses. People say like cats rule the internet, but I think octopuses are like number 2. You could spend a whole afternoon just reading about the amazing things they do and watching really fun videos of them solving puzzles and using tools and just having these personalities and capabilities that are way beyond any other animal that I've ever encountered. Certainly, I have cats at home, and sometimes I feel like they're judging me in the same way that Marcellus judges humans, but octopuses are definitely on a different level.
We're gonna take a question from our at-home audience. Which author, living or dead, would you like to collaborate with?
Oh my gosh. Well, it assumes that they would want to collaborate with me. I'm a huge John Irving fan. I think that would be, the way that he draws his characters, his books are like kind of longer and meatier than anything I would have ever tried to undertake, but I'm obsessed with how he creates his characters. I would love to like workshop with him and learn from him. One of my favorite books of the last few years was Less by Andrew Sean Greer. I would love to learn how he did that, just some of the devices that he uses in that novel and the humor, paired with the real emotion, I would love to work with him. So, yeah, he does. I haven't read it yet. I'm really excited to. So, yeah, the offer's on the table, guys. So, Andrew and John.
Someone at home also said my Octopus teacher, I believe it's on Netflix, is also very good if you're an Octopus
Yeah,
fan.
yeah.
Do you have a question? Oh, does anyone else have any questions? Okay, let me come around to you.
My question to you is, like, when you're writing characters that are maybe, like you said, like outside of your realm of knowledge, like how much research do you put in to kind of feel like you can go to your reader and make them believe that that character is what they are, and even if it's not your sphere of knowledge, and you know, because I feel like that's a huge rabbit hole that you could go down and spend way too much time kind of trying to flesh that out.
Yeah, so I think, you know, particularly, so writing like an older character, you know, so, you know, I am, let's call it 40 when I was writing this, Tova is 70, so that, you know, there's a good 30-year gap there. I think just, there is some research that you can like look at what would have been popular when she was a kid, because, you know, the same way that for me, like, you know, 90s cultural references really hit home, for her it's going to be something different because of that era. I think there's probably a limit to how much research you can really productively do, like how much Googling can really help you here. And at some point it just kind of has to be like, you have to commit to it. And feedback from others is also, I think, really important when you're writing a character that is kind of out of your wheelhouse or out of your own personal experience. So I think definitely, you know, I know that if there are sensitivity readers that you can get when you're writing someone who is, you know, you might want someone who has more of that experience to read that character, and those can be really useful too.
Any other questions? Oh.
This is similar to your last question, but as you were writing the book, I should say, as I was reading the book, I noticed that there were so many things that you seemed so knowledgeable on. And I'll just point out one. It's when Cameron's driving in his car, his trailer that doesn't work very well. And he has to stop and fix some things. And you just seem to know so much about cars. So, and if I was in your shoes, I wouldn't know the first thing about that. So is this just all from life experience, or did you do a lot of research on the way about different things?
It's mostly from Google, although there's often like a kernel of experience that I think drives some of those scenes. And I don't want to say too much about that, I don't want to be spoilery, but I remember when I got my first car, my dad making me prove that I knew how to check the oil and change the tire and put chains on the tires if I wanted to go driving in the mountains in the winter. And I remember having an experience of there being something obviously wrong with the car, and I just willfully ignored it, and then it literally blew up in my face. And having that moment of, oh God, like my dad was right, like I should have paid attention to that rattling noise. So yeah, a little kernel of experience, but like mostly Google. People who are writing in this day and age are very blessed by the internet. Like it makes it really easy to gain a lot of knowledge about very specific things very quickly.
Any other questions?
First of all, thank you so much. This has been great. We talk a lot about editing and what ends up on the floor.
Yeah.
So is it more of it from you or from the editor, and how does that relationship work?
Oh, interesting question. Most of the volume of the, I call it kind of the recycle bin, because hopefully I can recycle it into something someday, but it was kind of self-cut and was a result of this process of really kind of figuring the plot out as I was writing and having to just say, oh man, I really loved that scene, but like it just now that the road is turned this way, it doesn't belong anymore, so I have to cut it. My editor, Helen Etzma at Echo, who is amazing, did a wonderful job of helping me pare back a little bit in some places. And so some of that cutting room floor is a result of that process. I think that she has a real knack for knowing where to let the reader kind of draw their own conclusions, and where to, obviously explain more, be more direct. But we did it was a pretty like delicate process of just trimming here and there to kind of give the reader a little bit more autonomy, maybe is the word, or just leave a little bit less on the page and more to the imagination.
Any other questions? Nope. Okay. Well, yeah.
This is just a comment, not a question.
Sure.
But thank you very much. And I'm here with several of my book club members, and we're really excited to read and discuss your book in November.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that's a great time to stop so we can sell and sign some books. So thank you so much, Shelby and Karen. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you all so much for attending.
Thank you.